US big tech corporations have basically taken over the world. In almost every single country on earth, the digital infrastructure upon which the modern economy is based is owned and controlled by a small handful of technology corporations largely based in Silicon Valley in California. These big tech corporations, these monopolies, have enormous control not only over the economy of the United States, but over the global economy. And increasingly, this system is looking more and more like neo-feudalism. The feudal landlords of medieval Europe who controlled all of the land and turned almost everyone else into serfs who worked on the land that they didn't own on behalf of those landlords. Today, we see a contemporary equivalent. These big tech corporations are the modern day version of those landlords. And today, these corporate feudal lords, these corporate landlords, control all of the digital land upon which the digital economy is based. And every other company, small businesses, average people, are like serfs that are working on this digital land controlled and owned by these big tech monopolies. Now, Amazon is a perfect example of how these US corporate monopolies have become neo-feudal lords. Unlike monopolies of the 19th and 20th centuries that controlled a single market, Amazon controls a huge part of the marketplace itself. Not just a single market, but the marketplace. Amazon creates and destroys entire markets. And at the same time, Amazon actually takes the ideas of other businesses, copies their products, and then sells those products on Amazon and rigs the algorithm so its products show up first. This was exposed by the mainstream media outlet Reuters, which obtained thousands of pages of internal Amazon documents, including emails, strategy papers, and business plans. And Reuters reported in 2001 that Amazon runs a, quote, systematic campaign of creating knockoffs and manipulating search results to boost its own product lines. Reuters wrote that according to these internal documents from Amazon, the monopoly, quote, exploited internal data from Amazon to copy products sold by other companies and then offered them on its platform. Amazon also rigged its search results so that the company's products would appear. Now, that report from Reuters was specifically looking at Amazon's subsidiary in India, which is one of the fastest growing markets for Amazon. But this is not true only of India. This is true for other countries around the world. So Amazon has become such a monopoly that it's a kind of new corporate feudal lord that makes the robber barons of the 19th and early 20th century in the United States, it makes those capitalist robber barons look like children and like what they did like child's play compared to what Silicon Valley is doing now, not just in the US, but in countries around the world. And it's not just Amazon. Google does the same thing. The Wall Street Journal reported back in 2017 that Google uses its search engine and it rigs the algorithm in order to promote its products. And in many cases, Google doesn't actually hide this. If you search something on Google, oftentimes the first few results come from companies, which tend to be big monopolies, that pay Google in order to show up first in the results. Google has a market share in the US of over 90%. If you look at a chart of Google compared to other major search engines like Bing and Yahoo and DuckDuckGo, it's like a joke. I mean, you can barely see the other search engines. Google has a complete monopoly on searching the internet, basically, in the 21st century. An e-commerce intelligence firm called Marketplace Pulse did a study in 2023 that found that Amazon takes more than half of the revenue of vendors on its platform. Businesses who simply want to sell their products on Amazon have to pay the corporate neo-feudal lord 8 to 15% in referral fees, 20 to 35% in fulfillment, and then up to 15% in advertising. These costs have steadily increased. In 2016, vendors on Amazon had to pay the corporate neo-feudal lord about 35% of their revenue. As of 2022, they now have to pay Amazon more than 50%, according to this study. And given that Amazon not only dominates e-commerce in the US, but in many other countries, what we're seeing is that this US monopoly controls the marketplace of many countries on Earth. If you want to create a small business, you have to pay the neo-feudal lords at Amazon, billionaire oligarch Jeff Bezos, one of the richest human beings on Earth. You have to pay him half of everything that you make for your products, even though he and Amazon did not do anything to help you create those products. No, they are simply the middlemen, the neo-feudal lords who are taking their cut. And it actually gets even worse when you realize how Amazon's buy box works. There are websites out there teaching sellers on Amazon how they can have the buy box on their product. What does that mean? Well, if you go to Amazon and you look up a product, Amazon only allows certain vendors that it picks to have a box on the right-hand side that says, buy this product. But you can only get the buy box if you're selling that product at a certain price, and the price has to be lower than on competitor websites. This is a way for the corporate feudal lords at Amazon to maintain their monopoly so other competitors do not have better prices. So they want to make sure that people only buy on Amazon. The irony is that what we're essentially saying is that this private corporation run by this big capitalist oligarch, Jeff Bezos, is setting prices. This is so ironic because capitalists for decades have criticized the old Soviet Union and central planning that was done in certain socialist economies, saying that this is so inefficient and it's crazy that the government sets prices for certain strategic products. But what we're actually seeing now is that one of the world's largest corporations, run by a big billionaire capitalist who has $200 billion of wealth, Jeff Bezos, Amazon is setting prices like in the Soviet Union, except we're talking about capitalism, or we're talking about such an extreme form of monopoly capitalism that it's essentially reverting to feudalism, to neo-feudalism, and these big capitalists have become so powerful that they no longer control just a single market. They control the marketplace, period, and they can prevent anyone from entering the marketplace. There can be no new competitors because they own all of the digital land upon which the other competitors would try to sell their products. Now, I'm certainly not the first person who has talked about this. In fact, the friend of the show, economist Michael Hudson, has been talking about neo-feudalism for many years, especially focusing on the finance sector and Wall Street. But another economist, Yanis Varoufakis, the former finance minister of Greece, published a book about this in 2024 titled Techno-Feudalism, in which he talks about the emergence of cloud capital, these big corporate monopolies that not only control markets, but they control the very marketplace itself. And he refers to this as cloud capital. In fact, if you look at the marketplace for cloud computing infrastructure, 3 US companies control 67% of the entire world's market. Amazon Web Services, AWS, has 31% of the world market share of cloud computing. Microsoft's cloud company, Azure, has 25% of the world market share, and Google Cloud has 11%. These 3 corporate monopolies, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, control 2/3 of the world's cloud computing infrastructure. And this is the infrastructure upon which so much of the internet is built. If you want to use an app, if you want to use one of these major websites, they're often hosted on one of these big three monopolies. These are the cloud capitalists that Varoufakis also refers to as cloudalists. And although I disagree with some of Varoufakis' analysis, I think, for instance, that he's too critical of China. I disagree with his criticisms. But I think one point that he is absolutely right about is how the US cloud capitalists, their fight to control the entire global digital economy is one of the main reasons driving Washington's new Cold War against Beijing. Because if you look around the world, these big tech monopolies based in Silicon Valley control basically the entire global digital infrastructure in almost every country except for one. There is only one large country that has alternatives to these US big tech monopolies. And can you guess what it is? China. Decades ago, as big tech corporations were developing, the Communist Party of China realized that so many of these US big tech companies would eventually control its economy and its digital infrastructure. So instead, China banned many of these companies, and instead they imposed what you could see as digital tariffs, a kind of protectionism to develop their own infant industries. This is how every wealthy economy became wealthy. This is what the US did up until World War II. It was one of the most protectionist countries on earth. This is what all of the European advanced capitalist countries did. This is also what Japan and South Korea did as they were in their catch-up period of industrial development. They used tariffs and protectionist policies to develop infant industries so their firms could compete internationally with the other major Western firms. So China developed alternatives to Google and alternatives to Facebook and alternatives to Amazon. And of course, TikTok became extremely popular around the world, threatening the monopolies of Silicon Valley big tech corporations. So what was the response of the US government? To ban TikTok and try to force the parent company to sell TikTok to a US company, because the United States will not tolerate any competitors to the cloud capitalists, these cloudalists, these neo-feudal lords who control the infrastructure of the entire world's digital economy. This is the fundamental difference between China's socialist system and the US neoliberal capitalist system that is more and more monopolized, where big corporations have taken over the US state. All of the banks are private. In China, all of the major banks are state-owned. They are run by the government and the Communist Party on behalf of the working class, on behalf of the people of China. And they use the banks in order to fund productive investment, providing tangible goods and services that develop the country, that make people's lives better, instead of big bubbles based on financial speculation in derivatives. There are literally hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of derivatives on Wall Street and in these Western casinos that we call the stock market. In the US, all of the banks are privately owned, and all of the big tech companies basically control the government. Whereas in China, it's the government that controls these companies. That is the fundamental distinction. But I do agree with Varoufakis' argument that one of the reasons driving this new Cold War is the US attempt to destroy the only alternative to these US big tech corporations, which control the government. The government is acting on behalf of Silicon Valley. It's acting on behalf of the military-industrial complex. It's acting on behalf of Wall Street that want to destroy these Chinese competitors and privatize them and sell them off to capitalist investors in the West, which is exactly what they were trying to do to TikTok. And China said no. So the US response was, fine, if you want to sell us TikTok, we will ban it. Now, this observation that in capitalism there's an inherent tendency toward monopoly, that's not new. We've known this for a long time. You can go back and read Karl Marx. He could clearly see in the 19th century that as corporations grew bigger and bigger, they would destroy all of their competitors and then dominate the entire market. And in fact, the political economist Rudolf Hilferding wrote about this back in 1910 in his brilliant book, Finance Capital, a study of the latest phase of capitalist development. He showed how as corporations become bigger and bigger and monopolize industries, they also merge with bank capital and they form big cartels of finance capital that dominate not only entire industries and countries, but they dominate other countries, leading to the rise of imperialism, as Lenin famously wrote about. So the extraction of the value produced by workers around the world is more and more abstracted. And instead, that wealth, that capital is stored in the form of finance capital in banks that suck out the wealth of the workers of people, largely in the global south, in the colonized nations. And this eventually creates these conflicts between different financial capitalists that cause war. This is fundamentally imperialism. And this is ultimately what caused World War I. The advanced capitalist countries of the West, the imperialists in Europe and the US fought a war over empire and over control of finance capital, control of these monopolies around the world. But what we see today is such a concentration of those monopolies that now it's essentially US monopoly corporations that dominate the entire planet. There are no alternatives other than in China's socialist system. If you go to other big economies like India, for instance, almost all of these apps, almost all of the digital infrastructure is controlled by US corporations. And this is true of most other countries on earth.